Well, I think it means that Sherry Redstone has won the battle. That Les Moonves implicitly is acknowledging that there's evidence out there, including presumably the Ronan Farrow pieces in the New Yorker about CBS, which quoted 6 women by name as saying he acted inappropriately, and then had corroborating witnesses at the time. And then that was fact-checked by the New Yorker fact-checkers, who really act as an independent investigative arm. And so I think it's just confirming that what was in that in the magazine. And Les Moonves had a great career. He's probably the most successful modern television executive, but it sounds like sayonara.
What do you think CBS is without him?
Damaged. He's an extraordinary executive. I mean, you don't cast someone for a major sitcom or program on CBS without him approving the casting. He looks at many of the scripts. CBS has been #1 in prime time probably 14 of the last 16 years under his rule. So, and their profits are greater today than they were 10 or 20 years ago. So you have to give him points for that. On the other hand, this is an inglorious way to leave.
It certainly is. Were you surprised that he wasn't suspended pending the results of the investigation that's still ongoing into his behavior, Ken?
Yeah, David, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I see that you and others, you have reported that the board in negotiating would agree to an initial figure, but obviously if the investigation turns up with more negative information, they would roll that back, and obviously he would resist that. But there's a real question whether you agree to anything until you have the investigation done.
Yeah. Moving on to social media, which you've become expert in as well over these last few years. I assume you watched yesterday's hearings. You know, what were your thoughts as it was going on and what you saw there, and the decision by Google, pointed out so many times by others, to not be there?
I think it was a classic mistake on Google's part. It brought me back to memories of Microsoft. I covered the Microsoft trial in '99 and 2000. And Microsoft took this belligerent position towards the government. You don't have a right to question us. We did nothing wrong. They were found guilty of antitrust violations. And they paid a penalty for that. And they learned from that to be much more open and forthcoming. I was stunned that Google didn't send either its chief executive or the head of the Google search operation. And I think what the Congress did, or the Senate did, by putting an empty chair with the name Google beside it was devastating.
So, I mean, sort of to your book, Frenemies, which is about the advertising business in general, are you saying here, Ken, that Google and Facebook have too much dominance and power over the digital advertising business right now?
Well, Google and Facebook have a little over 60% of all the ads, digital ads, and that's growing. So if you're a digital company, you're competing against them, and you're not competing very well. The real question becomes, they're so reliant. 97% of Facebook's revenues come from advertising. Almost 90% of Google's come from advertising. They are reliant on more clicks, more attention, and the advertisers increasingly are saying, hey, we want more data so we can target our ads. Well, more data gets into privacy issues. And yet Facebook and Google have a real incentive to keep getting more advertising dollars, more clicks, more targeted information. And the public may not have that same incentive. So there's real question, is advertising partly a culprit here? And then the question becomes, is there a replacement for advertising? The fact of the matter is that one thing that Trump and Hillary Clinton agreed on in 2016 is that the middle class, the working class, the majority of Americans, their income had not grown in 10 years. The thought that they could pay for Facebook or pay for Google and it not be free, I think that's a pipe dream.
So, Ken, do you envision, can you imagine, I guess is the better question, something of a pendulum swinging back away from dollars that have flowed out of legacy media into social, at least? I mean, it's hard to, we wondered this morning whether it could ever go back into sort of linear television, but I don't know, maybe you see that as a possibility.
I don't. I wish I did, yeah. But I'm not an optimist that money is going to flow back to newspapers and magazines and radio, advertising dollars, which is really responsible in large measure for the decline of newspaper circulation and newspapers going out of business. And and journalists being laid off. I think it's very hard to replace that. There are some newspapers like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Economist, the New Yorker that can raise the subscription rate because they have an affluent readership. But the Detroit News, the New Orleans Picayune Saint, they can't do that. And they're reliant much more on advertising. And advertising, I don't think, is going to flow back to legacy media.